All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lasting Learning Podcast. I am so excited for this episode. You have no idea why. If you're watching this in a second, you're going to see why. If you're listening to this in a second, you're going to hear why. But I have somebody on here that I admire to the nth degree. Got a woman on here that I just have like 1,000 questions to ask. So if you're driving right now, I hope you are on a mega road trip. If you are, well, you're not heading to work right now, wherever it is you're going, just be ready because you're gonna grow, you're gonna develop, you're gonna smile, you're gonna laugh, and hopefully have a good time. Today we have the boss on with us. We've got Katelynn Giordano. Katelynn, thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me, Dave. I am so excited to be here today.
You have no idea. You have no idea. Now, Katelynn, a lot of people that are watching this or listening to this know who you are because we see you everywhere. We read all the stuff you're putting out, but you do a lot of stuff behind the scenes too. Because there are 7 billion people worldwide listening to this right now, there's a chance one or two of them might not know who you are. Do you mind just filling us in? Who are you and what are you up to?
For sure. So Katelynn Giordano, I am a middle school language arts teacher in Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And I'm also a training and development specialist with the Teach Better team. So I've been working in education. This is year 7 now. So it's been a fun journey. It's been a fun time. I blog at my own blog, Curriculum Coffee. And then I also I write for Teach Better and work with them. So yeah, got
awesome.
A few things going on.
You have a lot of things going on. And oftentimes a lot of the things that you're doing are kind of behind the scenes. You're just working and cranking stuff out. But the stuff you put out there is so stinking amazing. And you speak my language, which I love. I pick up everything that you're putting down. It's crazy when you say that you've been in education for 7 years.
Yeah.
7 years. You are like a seasoned veteran with the stuff that you write and the stuff that you put out and the stuff that you think. Talk to me a little bit. Where did all this come from? And where did the bravery come from to step out and say, okay, I'm going to try some things differently?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to start off in a school district that was really innovative and really supportive of their teachers. And so there was a ton of autonomy where I was. And I think that's really what has shaped a lot of my willingness to kind of jump in, because that was not just my whole district, but specifically like the administration team at the middle school that I was at. My principal was amazing. And his leadership style was very much of the supportive leader. He was there to provide you with what you needed, but allowed you to really be who you were as a teacher. And so I was able to go in and just try things and see how they worked and just experiment a little bit, which is, I feel like, how we learn so much as educators, because we can just like see how things go and reflect on how they went and kind of like tweak and change. And so that opportunity and that autonomy truly is what kind of shaped me and my approach, because I was given the room to try things out and see how they worked for me.
So let me ask from the I've got a hat on. We'll act like it's an administrator's hat on right now. So a lot of what you're saying right now, I'm like, yes, preach that. But then there's this administrative side of me that says, but hold on, because simple reflection and autonomy can be dangerous. I'm thinking about myself. So I wake up in the morning, I get dressed, I look in the mirror and I think that reflection looks good. Then I walk downstairs, my kids make fun of me and they say, that doesn't match, Dad. You look awkward. That doesn't work. Because my reflection to me is not always an accurate reflection of the outside world. So
Sure.
you were given a lot of autonomy early on. And there might be some people that say, well, that's dangerous, because how in the world is she supposed to know what's right, what's wrong, what works and what doesn't? How are you able to wrestle with that and continue to grow and not just settle into comfort zone?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And again, I do think it has a lot to do with like the leadership that I had, because they approached our evaluations and our observations as a very like not stressful situation. I don't know how else to say it, but it was like, we're here to help you grow. So I want to come into your room. I want to see what you're doing. And when I'm making suggestions, when I'm saying things, this is not because it's a gotcha moment. This is because I'm truly here to help you become better. And so that was really cool. But then on top of that, I had a great experience going through my master's program, and it encouraged me to do a lot of reading and a lot of research and a lot of thinking. And that has shaped a lot of what I've tried, because it wasn't just this, this sounds cool, I'm going to do it. It was, okay, this is a really interesting approach that I've read about. How could I implement that in my role, in my setting? How can I make this research-backed approach work for me?
So now, this is where I'm starting to get excited now, because you're talking research, but you're also not talking about diving in and reading dissertations and reading a bunch of articles that have 1,000 citations. I mean, you're looking at the practical application, the research where people say, here's something that's tried and true, and there's research that backs what I do. Mm-hmm. Specifically, I know something that you really, really, really are excited about is standards-based grading, mastery-based learning, competency-based instruction, how we want to phrase it, but getting kids to meet objective standards towards progress and giving them specific feedback. So in this language arts classroom, where for years, for decades now, every single year we've been teaching nouns and pronouns. Every single year in every grade, we have kids diagramming sentences and taking spelling tests. You're at the middle school level, and maybe, possibly, probably for the first time, kids are getting a language arts experience that's different, where you're now focusing more on standards and skills as opposed to regurgitation and memorization.
Yep.
Talk to me about that evolution for you and then how that plays out on the bigger scale as well.
Yeah. So I went into an English classroom first off with a background in math. So it was like, okay. And so I was like coming into it with I need to do some learning and some growing here, because I've never taught this subject before. So I like dove in to different research-based articles, different books. Like I'm a huge fan of like reading books that are like research practical, though. Like it's kind of like you mentioned before, I want the stuff that's going to give me an approach to take, not just this big theoretical piece. And so I started like really diving in, because I didn't want to run into my classroom and just like have no idea what I was doing. And so it was like this process of, let me find the best possible information that I have and find a way to make this work for me and make this work for my style. And so it started off like a little shaky, a little rocky, because it was new. It was like, I'm trying to implement these things that I may or may not really understand, or I may be trying to do it the way that they've presented it, not necessarily the way that I would do it myself. And so that was kind of like a reckoning moment for me, was how do I infuse myself and my kids into this? And when I had that moment, it was like, okay, I've been doing this wrong. Like I can't just take someone else's like framework and just do it. I have to think about the ways that I can honor my kids and who they are, and honor myself as a teacher, and bring those things together in my classroom, versus just, here's this theory that I'm going to try.
Okay, so let's start breaking this down then for people that are listening to this, saying, wow, this woman's got a lot of passion and a lot of energy. I get that she's doing stuff differently, but what is so different? Because I talked to a lot of people about standards-based instruction. Let's just start with that, with that tenet. So standards-based instruction, standards-based grading. A lot of people, the majority of people that I talk to, say, I'm already doing that. I'm teaching standards. I mean, what else am I supposed to be teaching? But I would contend that we teach a lot of stuff that's not standards. Or as I say, a standard is only standard if it's standard. We don't teach standards in a standard way, or we don't interpret standards in a standard way. So in your world, how do you define what you do in your classroom? What is different about your world, your room, compared to others in other places?
Yeah, so my instruction is completely driven by our learning objectives. I had units, I had activities that I loved doing, but they weren't aligned to a learning objective that
and I would probably interject that they were probably good things too, right? You would look at them and say they had value. You weren't just wasting kids' time, right?
Right. They were good. They were doing something valuable, but it wasn't aligned to a learning objective. And I couldn't justify continuing to do that. So I think that was like one of the first pieces. But when you are designing a classroom that is standards-based, when you're designing a unit, a curriculum, a year that is standards-based, what is driving your instruction are those learning objectives. Yes, you can build units around them. Yes, you can build great tasks and activities, but that end goal needs to be that learning objective. You need to have those things in mind throughout. And so when my classroom runs, like, you can come into my room any day, anytime, and I won't be the only one that can tell you what we're working towards. You could ask any one of my kids, what's the objective today? And they could tell you. Not because it's written on the front board, but because they know what they're doing and why they're doing it.
So that why piece is important. And
Yes.
so I'm gonna go back to what you said early on, that the stuff you were teaching your kids was good and it was valuable, and there was a why behind why you were doing it. But then you said, but you couldn't justify doing that anymore. Why? Why did you have this awakening? You said, okay, I've got to shift. I've got to adjust some of my priorities here.
Because the why behind it wasn't this learning objective. It wasn't this standard that we had that we wanted our kids to learn. It wasn't this skill that we were trying to teach. It was an activity that I wanted to teach, not a skill.
Okay, but so Katelynn, I'm going to play devil's advocate for all the other teachers in the world right now, because there are curriculum directors in the world who say, well, Katelynn, you're just a teacher. You don't have the freedom to decide what standard. I decide on the textbooks you get. I decide on the pacing guide. I decide all of that. I tell you what you're supposed to teach, all in the name of fidelity. Because if I let you, Katelynn, interpret these standards or these learning objectives in your own way, then we're going to have anarchy. We're going to have a mutiny. We're going to have everybody doing things their own way. So yeah, a standard can only be standard, but I am the person to determine that. The textbook companies have already determined that. You're just a teacher. How do you respond to that?
So my response to that is, it's got a couple of things. Number one, teachers are professionals. I think that we are one of the only professions in the world that is not viewed as the professionals that we are. Many of us have multiple degrees in our content areas or in education. So we have not just learned, but we have studied in depth what we are doing in our classrooms every day. And on top of that, the best ways to do it. So we know from practice and from education how this needs to get done and the best ways to do it. And then on top of that, I would argue that absolutely standards are standards, but why aren't teachers the ones that should be regulating and deciding that? Why don't we have a voice in how that works and how that gets done? We absolutely should, because if we don't, and for that matter, if our students don't, that's a problem. We are the ones that are doing this, and our students are the ones that are consuming it. So as like the two main facets of that exchange, we should absolutely be involved in that process.
So how do you think we got to this place that we're in? Because we've had standards for a long time, a long time. I mean, that's what's bizarre to me, is a lot of times when we talk standards-based grading or mastery-based instruction, competency-based instruction, it's presented almost as if it's new, but it's not. I mean, this has been around for a long time, but we've drifted away. And in many places, we've drifted away because we're so good at the blame game. We want to have somebody else to blame when things go wrong. So we can say, no, it was the administration, the curriculum, or the textbook, or somebody else that didn't do it. And sometimes it's because things have been forced upon us. And sometimes it's just this muddy mess of, well, I've always done it this way, and I've never thought about it that way, even though the research tells me I should. How do we undo it? I mean, how do we get ourselves to this place where the stuff that you're doing can grow to scale and it doesn't seem so novel and crazy? I mean, it makes sense. There are standards. We have to teach the standards. We frame them as learning objectives. The kids should know what they're learning so that they have buy-in, so that they can articulate their growth in the process. You as the teacher should have some autonomy in creating this. I mean, it makes so much sense. So how do we get other people to understand it? Is it just keep preaching the message?
I think that's part of it, but I also think it's the acknowledgement that this is going to take time, it's going to take effort, it's going to take work, and it's
Yes.
going to take our willingness to do that.
Mm.
Because I can't sit here and tell you that making this transition and making this change isn't time consuming, doesn't take work on my end, because it absolutely does. But we have to be open and willing to doing that work because it matters and because it's going to improve what we're doing every day. I have a visitor.
So those people that are watching right now, the way it looks in the screen looks like you have the smallest cat ever sitting on your shoulder. There we go. So you can see it's not actually a tiny cat sitting on her shoulder. It's in the back. For those of you listening right now, just picture a cat walking into the room, sitting on a little perch behind Katelynn here. But because of the perception, it's amazing. It's awesome. Anyway, yeah. So distractions happen. It's all good. That's life. Right. I want to keep going into this line of talk real quick, though. You talk about the fact that it is hard work. There is time involved. But I think what people forget is that there's time commitments involved in all aspects of education, in all aspects of teaching, if you're doing it right. It's just a matter of when you're going to invest the time. So I used to be a middle school teacher as well, a middle school language arts teacher. And I remember that my weekends were hell. I was that guy bringing home backpacks filled with essays and papers. And I was going through and reading these 3 to 5 page papers and marking every spelling mistake and every comma error and everything I could mark up on those papers to try to prove how smart I was and that I could find every error to give feedback on it. And it took tons of time, as opposed to front-ending it, saying, what's my focus going to be, coming up with intentional plans, and then when I'm grading, just looking for those specific things to provide concrete, objective feedback to the kids based off of the learning target. One requires time up front. One requires time all frickin' year long. We all have the same amount of time. It's when are you going to invest your energy?
Well, and one works and one is
well, there's that too. Yeah, that's well said. So with knowing that, what are your summers like? Are you just constantly planning and are your wheels always spinning, or do you get downtime?
I do definitely get downtime. I am very, very intentional about that. So I will tell myself in the summers, you are going to work at this time on this day, and that's it for today. And so I think really being honoring your own time and kind of creating a schedule for yourself is important. And that's how I've really made this happen is I don't work constantly. Contrary to popular belief, I don't. It's time that I tell myself, you're going to unplug, you're going to take some time away, and you're going to enjoy and relax and take a break. But it's also the knowledge that I'm going to put this work in now so that I have the capacity and the ability to take a break during the school year. Because the school year is 9 months long, summer is 3. I'm totally willing to put in that work in the summer, those 3 months that we have where we're not at school, because during those 9 other months, I have a lot more ability to have that free time to take that step back when I need it.
And I can vouch for the truth behind your statement, because there are a lot of people that do know you and think, wow, no, you're constantly on, you're always working. But you might not remember this, but a couple of months ago, I reached out to you specifically and said, Katelynn, I haven't seen you on social media. I just want to make sure that you're okay and to let you know that I'm thinking about you. And you said, no, I am purposely taking some time away right now. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. Because a lot of us would try to come up with excuses and come up with 1,000 other reasons, but you were like, nope, I'm just being intentional. That's amazing. Yeah, that is powerful.
I needed a minute. I got a new job in a new district, and we had to move and all this stuff was happening. So I was like, you know what? You don't need to be on right now. You're just going to take this and you're going to focus on what's happening over here, and you're just going to let that be. And it's giving yourself that almost permission to do that, because it feels weird to take that moment and be like, nope, I'm going to step back for a minute. It feels so contrary to what our culture as educators is, but it's so valuable and so important. And it's to the point where I've told Jeff Gargas this multiple times. I do this for myself daily. I have an hour of time blocked out either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day where I go work out. I don't have I don't take my phone with me. I don't answer emails. that is my time to just not be on. And people know, like, you're not going to get through to me then. So that, like, if I'm not answering you, like, people will know, like, she'll come back. But this is my 1 hour of, like, all right, we're going to take a step back. We're going to decompress.
So I feel like the theme of this is just focus, and all that you do, you've got this laser focus on the intentionality, the purpose, the priority. Like every single thing has a purpose. Every single thing has a place. I can imagine your kitchen cabinets are organized by color and shape and size. Your spices are alphabetized. I mean, are you that way in all aspects of life, or?
No, not everything.
Okay.
Not everything. I am pretty organized, but it doesn't, the focus is really, it's mostly just with like balancing my work and my personal life and making sure that I've achieved something that's not necessarily 50-50, but that's right for me.
So you talk about achievement. So I'm going to transition this a little bit.
Yeah.
You don't just focus on making your classroom space the most amazing space ever. You've grown to this person now that is helping, you are helping educators literally internationally now, not just even in the Chicago area, not just Illinois, not just the Midwest, literally around the planet. That's got to be crazy intimidating, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot of imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to be doing this?
Yeah, right. No, and I've told this story before, but last year I was at a conference, and it was a big national conference, a few thousand people there. And I got invited up to the green room like the night before where some of the presenters get to go. And I'm looking around at these people that I worship, and I'm hanging out, just having drinks with these people and feeling the same way, like they sent this to the wrong person. I'm not supposed to be here. That imposter syndrome is a real deal. But you are there. You are the person doing this. You know, you are changing lives and generations, really, because you are helping teachers empower kids who are going to do something different than they ever would have done otherwise. So it's scary and it's intimidating. But let me ask you now that why question again. Why look at the stage? It probably shouldn't use the word stage, but why is your stage now more than just your classroom? Why have you opened up the doors, and why are you willing to step out and help others?
So there are a few reasons for that. One, because since I met Ray Hewart, who has like catapulted me and challenged me to get out there and do this, she helped me like gain the confidence that I needed to really get out there and start doing what I'm doing. But on top of that, I have always had this, it's almost like idealistic in a way, but I would contend that that's a positive thing. But I view education as this immensely powerful thing. And I truly believe that, but I also believe that it has problems. It's not as powerful as it could be because it's not working for every kid and every educator. And realizing that you have this ideal, this idea that education is powerful. It can change lives. It can take you out of a situation you don't want to be in. It can change your life. It's this idea that, okay, yes, but is it capable of doing that for everyone? And it was that realization that like, no, it's not, that really made me want to do more and want to start challenging the things that I was seeing and help people make real change, because that's where it has to come from. It has to come from us. We have to do it, because if we don't, it's going to continue to be this inequitable system that isn't working.
I'm going to ask you a question, and you can pass on this question if you want to. But it's been said before that people are only experts when they're 50 miles from home. And what that means is it's sometimes harder to change your immediate surroundings, your immediate circumstances. And when you go outside and you work with districts or people that you don't have to work with day in and day out, sometimes it's easier to poke the bear. It's easier to ask those questions and to drive the change. Now, somebody who is now working with people all over the place, are you embracing that mindset that, one of the reasons you like this is because you're able to see quick change and you're getting people reach out to you that are hungry for it, and you're not having to necessarily force some change that sometimes happens closer to home?
I would say I like doing both.
Okay.
And I know that sounds a little weird, but I'm not one to shy away from a difficult conversation.
I don't believe that for a minute.
Or someone who I'm not someone who's going to sit back and allow something to continue happening when it needs to be challenged and it needs to change. So while yes, it is easier to do it in that separated way and in that way where you aren't necessarily like poking the bear, like you said, I would contend that you almost have to do both. Because my experience in challenging the powers that be and in making the changes that I've had to make and having the conversations that I've had to have because of what I'm personally doing, it has enabled me to then help other people navigate those same conversations. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot of the time, because I talk about standards-based grading and going gradeless in your classroom and really just eliminating points altogether, I always get asked like, okay, well, how do you get people to agree with that? And had I not had those conversations and done that work myself, I wouldn't have been able to answer that question for someone else.
Yeah.
It would have been a really easy cop-out for me to be like, oh, well, that's going to depend on your situation and you can figure it out. Like, while still maintaining that, like, here's all these great ideas. Now you go figure out how to have those really hard conversations that are actually going to make them happen. That's not really the kind of person that I am, nor is it the way that I would want to be. Like, I had those conversations. I did that work. I put that time in. And yes, your scenario is probably going to look different than mine, but I can still tell you from a place of experience how it went and what worked. And then frankly, what blew up in my face.
Yeah, so that's what I want to go there. So I've had the opportunity, the challenge, the obstacle, whatever, how we want to phrase it, to work now in 7 different districts in multiple states, okay? Huge believer in standards-based grading, but I also believe there's not a standard way to do standards-based grading because it looks different in every situation. The ultimate goal of grades, as Rick Wormley says, is communication, not compensation. And by that, the way that we communicate to different people must change. The way that I speak to you would be different than how I would speak to a Jeff Gargas or Rick Wormley, just because you're different people. And the conversations we have with different people has to change. So with that being said, you've had the opportunity to evolve in this process. And just like I have, in my first couple of experiences with trying to go to standards-based or to go gradeless and just provide objective feedback were epic failures. And primarily those epic failures were a result of me trying to do too much at once, going too big without getting people to weigh in. It was just me sitting in a conference, hearing somebody speak and saying, yep, I believe it, I'm going to do it, without thinking it through. And failure happens in a very real, very big way. So there are going to be some people that listen to you, going to be inspired by you, and they're going to say, nope, I'm doing that in my room without thinking it all through. Can you just give us some of those pitfalls? What are some of those things that could go wrong and have gone wrong that we need to be thinking through before we just jump all in and let failure slap us across the face?
Yeah. So first and foremost, going gradeless is 1,000% worth it, but you are not going to be able to do it all in one fell swoop. If you are, I really want to meet you and talk to you because I want to know how you did it so you could teach me. Because it is one of those things that has to be done in a process, at least the way that I see it, because if you go from having points and percentages to just removing that completely, it's a huge jump. And you haven't done the communication, you haven't done the education, you haven't done like the reflection on yourself to make it happen in a real way. It's not just saying, okay, I'm just not going to do that anymore. It's so much more than that. And so it's a process. And the way that I did it was very incremental. And so I went from being, first of all, someone who 100% believed in points and percentages and thought it was the be all end all, to someone who just got rid of it completely. But there were steps in between. I had to find a way to first align points and percentages with standards and find a way to continue reporting points and percentages because that's what we were mandated to do within this like philosophical framework of standards-based grading, of not having points and grades. And so it was this like incremental space. So I would say, first off, find a way to like almost roll it out like a step at a time. Don't remove everything all at once. Do a little bit here and there. And so I went from that to having like a grade per standard to having like, all right, instead of using points for this, we're going to use some phrasing to, okay, we need to figure this out. And there were so many failures along the way. The biggest one, and my favorite one, is when I decided that, okay, if you meet the goal, you will have a B.
And I'm glad I'm going to pause for that, because there are a lot of people out there right now that are going through this transition that are living in that space right now. And they're thinking and they're hearing the parents right now, right? So keep going now. Just take that pause.
Oh my God.
Go ahead.
It was the biggest mess of my life. And I eventually had a kid come up to me and she's like, so, and this kid was one of my favorite kids I've ever had, because she reminded me a lot of myself. She walked right up to me. She's like, so you're telling me that if I do exactly what I'm supposed to do, I'm going to get a B? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, I'm not even going to get an A? And I was like, no. And I couldn't in good conscience even answer her questions. And so it was this moment, like I was like, okay, so that's not good. And I had to change the entire infrastructure of the grading system that I put in place because it was wrong. The whole thing. Because if they did everything right, they wouldn't even end the quarter with an A. And as much as we all want to say that A's don't matter, because truly, I believe they don't mean anything, they still hold value to a lot of interested parties. And so we still have to make sure that we're speaking their language while working to change it.
That's it.
And so it can't be everyone's just going to get a B. Like, that's not.
Yeah, the bottom line is whatever grade we put on a paper, whether you're kindergarten and first grade and you're looking at smiley faces and stickers, or you're at the high school level and you're looking at A pluses and A minuses, or even if it's a rubric of a 1, 2, 3, 4, that letter grade or that grade you're putting on a paper is a shorthand abbreviation for the value you place on their work. It's you taking whatever thoughts and feedback you want to provide and coming up with some arbitrary symbol to communicate it in a quantifiable way. And I know that sounds like a bunch of jargon, but all it is you're taking a bunch of thoughts and saying, I'm going to give you a symbol to represent my thoughts. And people are going to see those symbols and interpret them 1,000 different ways. And it is our job to try to make sure that their interpretation matches with what we were trying to imply. Exactly. Otherwise, we're not communicating. We're missing the mark. And you just nailed it. You were trying to tell this kid, yep, you're doing everything right. And when she sees that mark, she's saying, I'm missing something. There's more that I could or should be doing. And you're saying, no, there's not. And she's saying, well, then make sure that little shorthand symbol reflects that. And there was this conflict, right?
Exactly.
Oh, there's so much that we could unpack with this, but I'm gonna let that hang, because I don't want to give people this shortcut to just jumping into it, because people are going to hear it and say, okay, so then I'm just going to go, and if a kid meets the standard, they're just going to get A's. That's not necessarily the answer either. There's a lot more that goes into this. There are going to be a lot of conversations that you have to have. And there are also people that are living in this world right now that maybe they've taken those first baby steps and they said, but I don't get paid enough for this. I already have a district grading scale. It works fine. It's not hurting anybody. I already have a policy in my student handbook. It works fine. It's not hurting anybody. I don't have the energy that Katelynn does to have these conversations, to think it through, or the time to sit down and do all this research. It's just not worth it to me. What would you say to somebody that would say that to you? I've got my own response, but I'm curious to hear yours.
Yeah. So one thing that you said twice that really stuck out to me is it's not hurting anybody. I would argue that is completely false. Because what we are doing in our classrooms when we're using these traditional points and percentages, when we're using this transactional type of learning, is we are not encouraging students to actually learn anything. We are encouraging them to do what they need to do to get paid the number of points that they want to get, that they want to earn, to end in a certain place that is or is not going to help them in the future. In my classroom, I don't want that. I want my kids actually learning and developing skills. I want to reinforce to them that we are not here to just do what we need to do to get the grade we want to get. We are actually, in order to get to that point, that grade you want to get, you are going to have to learn something, and you're going to have to master some of these skills. And your level of mastery isn't going to look like the next kid right over there or the kid over there. Your level of mastery is going to be based on you. And when we look at every single kid in our classroom and say, okay, the standard here is 98%, that's what you all need to hit, they're all comparing each other the whole entire time. And you are absolutely hurting the kid that is consistently getting a 64%. And you're also not communicating much to that kid at all, except, hey, you suck at English. Because they're not taking anything away like, hey, I need to work on this skill. They're not taking that away. They are not thinking to themselves, I need to accomplish this particular thing, or I know what I need to do. I know what reflection I need to have. I know how to get help from my teacher. All they're thinking when they see a 64% is, wow, I'm bad at this. I'm going to give up now because that kid over there is doing great and I'm never going to be like them.
I'm getting giddy right now. I just want to let you keep going and say, preach, preach, preach. I'm like in church right now. This is good. So a word that you kept saying, you kept using the word skill. You kept saying the kid is not going to learn the skill that's necessary. And a lot of times I think people equate skill with content, and though they are similar, but I'm getting a sense from you that sometimes skill and content might have separate meanings.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you break that down for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, there are content skills in my class, 100%. I teach English. I also teach social studies now, still figuring that out. But there are skills that are content based, 100%. But what's more than just being an English teacher, I don't just want my kids to learn how to use grammar correctly. I don't just want them to learn to use a comma, though I really hope they do. What's more than that is I want them to learn to think critically, to analyze what they are reading, what they are seeing and listening to. I want them to learn to use their voices out in the world to affect real change. I want them to become active members of their community. I'm not just teaching them to read and write and speak and listen. I'm teaching them to be the people that they are going to be. I'm giving them the skills, the ability to get to that point. We are working on that together in our classroom. So when I talk about skills, like, you're totally right. It's not just like, hey, we're all going to learn how to use commas correctly when we're using coordinating conjunctions. Like, yeah, we're probably going to learn that. But we're also going to learn how to communicate effectively so that when we really believe in something, we can go out and actually do something about it. We can take what we believe and go into the world and make something happen.
So I'm hearing you really speak to transference, application, and leverage. So as a language arts teacher, you don't care if a kid simply knows who the protagonist and antagonist is of a specific story. You want to make sure that that's something that they can apply in any class, in future years, and down the road in life. You want to make sure that everything that you teach will help them in other classes, so it has that leverage, that it's applicable to whatever job or situation they find themselves in life, and that it's transferable within multiple mediums. So if you're watching a movie, you're reading in social studies, if you're reading about or learning about ancient Egypt and you learn about Hatshepsut, you're not just focused on the fact that, yeah, she was this woman pharaoh. You're learning about female empowerment or some bigger theme. Is that what I'm hearing? That those are the skills?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
I always talk about it like through the lens of my argumentative writing unit is my absolute favorite unit to teach, because it's not just learning how to write an argumentative opinion piece. We go so much further than that. We explore what it means to have an opinion, what it means to fight for what we believe, what it means to back our opinion up with credible, reliable research, what it means to change our opinion if we find out that there isn't credible, reliable research to back it up, and then what it means to communicate what that opinion is to other people. So it's not just like, we're going to write an argumentative essay, let's go. It's how to be this person that has opinions and that can then communicate them to other people.
So I want to try to make this tangible for
Yeah.
those people that are now wrestling with this, and they're saying, well, this makes so much sense. Because yet another hurdle they're going to get into is when they get into the assessment and the grading piece of all of this. Because I don't think there's an educator out there that is going to hear what you just said and say, yeah, there's no place for that. Yeah, absolutely. We want everything they learn to be applicable and to have validity for the real world. However, what I'm also hearing is not just autonomy with Katelynn, the teacher, but autonomy with students, because what's applicable to one student will not be applicable to another student. But yet we're talking about standards and having standards for kids. How can it be standards based and yet still allow student choice and student autonomy? Don't those two worlds conflict? Because if I give students questions where there's a right and wrong answer, then it's easy to grade and assess objectively. How do you grade objectively when everybody is doing something a little bit differently?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. And again, I'm going to preface this by saying it's going to take work and it's going to take time. But the first thing that you have to do, and I actually do this with my kids because student voice is huge in my classroom. And I think that it should be involved in like every facet, all the way from the beginning of instruction to the end, assessment and grading. So when it comes to like making sure that we are hitting a standard, like set of what are we doing here? How do I grade this objectively? I have a standard in mind. So our argumentative writing standard is standard. This is what we're working towards. But what I actually do is I go through and unpack it myself. I determine like, okay, what does it mean to meet that goal? What does it look like? But then what I do is take it a step further. And I spend about like 25 minutes. It's a lot of instructional time, but I promise it's worth it, going through that with my class. So I have like our document pulled up on the board and I have the standard at the top and I ask them to tell me what it means. We unpack it together. We talk about what it looks like then to meet that goal. And I literally make a rubric while they are talking to me. So I am typing in what they are saying as a class, and that is the rubric that I use to grade them. And so we go through and I'll be like, okay, so what does it mean to have a thesis statement? And they'll tell me, we have to introduce our claim. We have to make sure we outline our reasons. And I type that in. And this is usually towards the end of instruction, so they like know what I'm saying when I ask what a thesis statement is. But we talk through what it means to meet a goal. So not only do I know what it is, they know what it is. And then they can go back through their piece of writing, they can go back through whatever activity they've been working on and know where they stand and where they fall and what they need to do, either getting help from me, either going back and revising. They know because we've talked through it and we've built this as a team.
That's good. That's good. So I'm going to speak to the other educators that might be listening who have 20 plus years in education. And I'm going to talk through some of what you just said, and I'm going to unpack it through the lens that I know I had for a long time. So I started off in the classroom back in 1999. I'm old, Katelynn. I know. So I've been 20 plus years. When I was in the classroom, I started hearing a lot of this talk about standards-based grading 20 years ago, but I dismissed it for a lot of reasons. First reason I dismissed it is I said, who am I as a teacher to decide what it is that I'm supposed to teach? There are people in suits that live in fancy houses and write cool textbooks that decide this. You've already kind of dismissed that claim. You said, no, you are the professional. You know the content. You know your kids. You are that person that can take the standards. You're not to create new ones. You're not going to go out there and just invent new things in a language arts classroom. I'm not going to teach my kids how shoelaces are made, but you can take the standards and say which of these are the most essential and where should you devote the most of your time. So I appreciate that you've broken that down for me. But you use the term rubrics in here. And rubrics, I'm going to be honest with you, back when I was in the classroom, that was the piece that made me think I'm already doing this. Because in my classroom, I was doing rubrics all the time, and I had student choice. I might present something. I would tell some kids, yeah, you can do a presentation if you want. Other kids, if you want to do a paper pencil test, you can do that. And I would have a rubric if they were doing a report, and I would say, you're going to get 10 points if your poster board is colored in. You're going to get 10 points if you dress like the character. You're going to get 10 points if you have so many vocabulary words. And I had a rubric for that, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me. Where was I missing the mark?
Yeah. So I always I talk with Chad Ostrowski about this all the time because that's one of his big things. He's like, are you assessing actual learning goals? Yes. And so when you're talking about things like coloring in a poster, dressing up as a character, I did that too. So please don't get me wrong that I'm standing up here saying like, oh yeah, I've never done that. Everything's great in my classroom. I did 100%. But when you go back and reflect, what is a grade communicating? What are you trying to get across to students and to families? You are communicating their academic ability in your class,
Yes.
in your content area. If you are grading them based on how colorful their poster is and whether or not they dressed pretty, you are not assessing the skills that you actually are trying to assess.
So good.
You are muddying the waters there and making it real murky as to what you're communicating.
Yep.
So I would argue that you just take all that out of there, behavior included. You don't give extra points for effort. You look at it and you say, did you meet this goal? And that's where your comment where standard has to be standard comes in.
Yep.
What does it mean to meet the goal? Did you do it? And so that's one of the arguments I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, so
Please
I apologize.
do.
That's one of the arguments that I get into with people about standards-based grading or about these proficiency levels. So the 4-point scale is everywhere right now. And I have a lot of people that'll say, well, they're in between. They're not quite at a 4.
It's a 3.5, right?
Exactly. And I'm always like, okay, so here's my question for you. Did they meet the goal? Well, they met parts of it, most of it. I'm like, but did they meet it? Well, no, they didn't get this one thing. Then they're not proficient. They are not there yet. You need to still communicate that they are not there yet because they're not. Mm-hmm. You can't be almost there. That's what that part is for. Okay. You tell them, here's what you need to do. And this is where reassessments come in. This is where they can go back and then show you, hey, I really can do this now. Let me show you. Yeah. Because you give them the opportunity, and then it's not that, well, they are so close. Okay, have them go back and reassess to show you that they've actually met the skill. Otherwise, what are you communicating?
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I'm going to rewind and then take you back down this tangent. So taking us back now 15, 16 years ago when I was rebelling and saying there's no way I'm embracing this crazy witchcraft of standards-based grading. I don't need it. I already have these rubrics. You're telling me what I was doing is I was grading an individual task. I wasn't grading learning. And a quality rubric is a rubric that can withstand any assessment model. So that rubric would identify the learning target. And if a child chose to do the presentation or take the test or get in a debate or write a paper, the same rubric can and should be used because it's based off of learning, not a task. But then there are those teachers that will say, okay, well, if I'm not grading it, the kids aren't going to do it. Those things are important. They have to be able to dress up in the character, or I have to give them points, or they're not going to sit quietly for 5 days to listen to every single presentation that goes on in class, right? Well, first of all, you're right. They're not going to pay attention because that's stupid. But yeah, how do you combat that when people say my kids won't do it unless I give them points?
So this is a huge argument that I get into with people. And I always use the word argument, but I feel like that's not very accurate because I don't like combat people on it. But I ask a lot of questions. And one of the things that I always come back to is I still hold kids accountable.
Yes.
I just don't use points to do it.
Yes.
So if a kid doesn't do something in my class, they don't turn something in, there are still consequences for that action. It's just not removing points.
Yes.
Because when you do that, you're again muddying the waters. You're not communicating their academic proficiency. You're communicating their academic proficiency, their behavior, their effort, their dress, their color, whatever. You need to only be communicating their academic ability there. Take that other piece out of it. What you're talking about, them not doing something, them not paying attention, them not participating, that's a behavior, not an academic quality, not an academic skill. So you need to address the behavior with an appropriate consequence that you could also involve the student in a discussion about. So in my classroom specifically, like if kids do not do something, I keep a log. And it's like I call it my late log because I like alliterations, English teacher. I keep a log and I will literally like meet with kids about it. I'll be like, hey, what's going on? Like we've got a couple things that weren't turned in on time. You turned them in, but like was something happening? Are you okay? Like what's going on? 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, yeah, I just had a lot going on. Like I couldn't do it. Cool, whatever. Let's make sure we stick to deadlines because we need to learn that skill. Usually doesn't cause a problem after that. If it continues to be a problem or we're just not turning anything in, reaching out to parents, coming up with a different solution. We have other things that we can use that are not points.
Yep.
You don't need to give them points to make them do things.
So good. So the basic premise of this is when we start talking about grades, we're talking about values. We're starting to talk about the things that we think are important, whether it's the actual standards we're choosing to teach and instruct, the progression of the standards and how we scaffold it, or even the things that we pull out of our grades. And I think that's oftentimes where a lot of conflict arises in staff meetings and staff lounges. When we start talking about grading, you'll get people that say, oh, so you don't think turning things in on time is important? You don't think effort is important? That's not what you're saying at all. What we're actually saying is, no, those things are so important, we're going to pull them aside so we can have a separate, distinct conversation about that as well. We want to make sure it's objective. When mom and dad come to parent-teacher conferences and they see that B, we can say, yep, that's about academic mastery. We'll get there. But now let's talk about this other stuff that we have to talk about, because that's the stuff moms and dads can help us with, is that the effort and the respect and timeliness, all important stuff. Pull it out of the grade so it's clear for us to communicate that with moms and dads too. If at parent-teacher conferences, you're having a conversation with parents about a letter grade and you can identify some things that mom and dad can do to help that letter grade, that's a cue to you that your letter grade might be a little muddy, because mastery has very little to do with what mommy and daddy can do with their kid, unless it's providing some sort of remediation or tutoring or something like that on the side.
Sure.
The slap across the face that I got that helped me change was along these lines. It was in my second to last year in the classroom. Parent-teacher conference, I was teaching gifted and talented kids, and a child had a 99%. And I got into a debate because the parents wanted to know why their child was missing the 100 and why their child was not the top of the class. And the parent, I kid you not, the dad, it was a mom and a dad, the dad said to me, Schmitto, how many Kleenex boxes do I need to bring so that my child can get enough extra credit to get 100? And at first I was offended. And then I realized, no, I set that stage up because at the beginning of the year, I told kids I would give them some extra credit if they brought in Kleenex boxes. And now this parent was using that against me in the end. And I realized, holy cow, I have corrupted what I'm communicating to these parents. And then I stumbled upon some research, Rick Wormley and others, that illuminated my thinking. And now I have this conversation with you, and you're continuing to refine my thoughts. And I'm hoping beyond hope, there are other people listening to this thinking, oh my God, Katelynn, you just opened my eyes to something here. And there are people now that are craving this, and they want to take that first step, but they're scared because they live in this box, or the perceived box of, my administration won't accept it. We already have these policies and these guidelines. What do I do? Do I just have to leave and go to somewhere else? No. But what is that first step? How would you encourage them to dip their toe in the water?
Yeah, so there's a few things that I would say, and it depends on like the type of learner and the type of educator that you are. Because personally for me, I was like, okay, now I'm learning that this system that I believe in isn't working. How do I like make this like a thing that I can fix? I personally started with reading every single research piece that I could find on grading, on grading's history, on changes, on what's wrong with standards-based grading, on what's right with standards-based grading. I did so much reading.
And I'm just going to say this, Katelynn, you need to write something. You need to write a book so that other people can start reading your stuff. I'm just saying. But we'll get back to that. Go ahead.
Well, we should get back to that, Dave. We should get back to that. But yeah, so I started with that because that's my personality. Other people, though, may want to try pieces of this in your classroom. And so for those people, I would say it's a great place to start if you eliminate giving points on whole assignments. And what I mean by that is instead identify what are the learning goals, the objectives, the standards you are assessing in an assignment, and give individual grades for each one of the standards. So if you have an essay, and in that essay you are assessing argumentative writing, but also grammar, language, assess those two pieces separately. There should be 2 grades in your grade book for that one assignment. and you standardize that in a few different ways. I could go on and on about this. But that's like one suggestion I have to kind of start.
Yeah.
You're not completely disrupting and throwing out your district's grading scale or any of that, but you are taking a like incremental step away from that old way of thinking, that traditional model, towards a standards-based system.
That's good. You got to tip that first domino, but then be prepared. They're all going to fall. You know, you talk about working out, and I'll use diet as an example. You know, if you're somebody that's looking yourself in the mirror and you're reflecting, you're saying, I have to get healthy. And you know, you need to eat more fruits and veggies. You need to stop going to McDonald's for every meal. You can completely go off the wagon. You can become a vegan tomorrow. But in a week when you're starving and you're realizing that you don't have any recipes and you don't know how to shop for that stuff, you're going to fall right back in the wagon. You find yourself in the McDonald's drive-thru line. But if you start with incremental steps saying, okay, I'm not going to eat after 8 o'clock. And tomorrow I'm going to eat one more serving of fruit. And you start taking those baby steps, you'll start to realize you're forming those habits. You believe in what healthy looks like, and you want to get there. You might believe that you know everything about standards-based grading, but if you jump all in all at once, you're going to find yourself in a mess. And it's okay to take baby steps, and eventually you'll be walking and running. I love that.
Yes.
I love it.
So
Katelynn, I know we could seriously talk all night, and I kind of want to, but the listeners are saying, I just want to get into action right now. I'm going to start implementing, and they're going to start looking for you all over social media and tracking your every word. I warned you ahead of time, though, that when we got to this place where I said, okay, the story is coming around right now, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up with what I call the mic drop moment. What is the thing? What is the thing that you want everybody to remember or to resonate on when they think of Katelynn? This is going to be it. There's no pressure here. I mean, truly, you're just looking at changing careers, changing the trajectory of lives. You've got kids all across the world right now who their future is in your hands based off of what you say with the mic right now. So, Katelynn, what is your mic drop moment? What do you want people to remember about this talk?
So I would say that when you enter your classroom every day, you are preparing your students for the people that they will ultimately be. That's a huge, huge responsibility. And there are a lot of ways to do it. But whatever you do, you need to honor your students and the people, the human beings that they are, and you yourself as the professional educator that you are.
Again, I just love it. I feel like I want to summarize that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave that because you said it so much better than anything that I'm going to ruin for you. So that was perfect. Perfect. Katelynn, I know I've said this ad nauseum tonight, and I've said it 1,000 times in the last couple of weeks, but I appreciate you so much. I mean, you're just filled with so much wisdom and yet so much energy. You take a topic like grading and assessment and you give it life. It's a topic that so many others hear and they just say, oh, I'm staying away from that, but you make it exciting. You bring passion to education. You make me excited to talk about education. You make me excited to keep learning and growing. You remind me how much more I still have to learn. And that's exciting. And you do it in such a sweet, humble way. And I just appreciate everything that you're doing. And I appreciate you taking so much time tonight just to talk to me and fill me up. This has been absolutely incredible and was everything I was hoping it would be. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I was so excited to come on because honestly, like, you are one of the people that I was like, oh my goodness, Dave Schmittou, I want to talk to him. So like, I'm just excited to be here, like, chatting with you. Plus you have like super cool people on your podcast all the time. So
right.
I'm like,
and the bar just got
club.
raised. That's awesome. That's awesome. No, you are absolutely incredible. Katelynn, can you just tell people how they can connect with you? It's going to be all over the show notes, but some people like me are lazy and they just want to hear it as opposed to searching through the notes. So how do we find you?
For sure. So I am at Katelynn Giordano at all social media accounts across the board. You can find me everywhere. If you don't know how to spell my last name, I just found out like 2 weeks ago that the way that Jeff and Ray remember it is Giordano. So that's apparently how you remember how to spell it. But if you're from like the Illinois area, it's like the pizza, Giordano's Pizza, just like that. So at KN Giordano all over social media. And then you can find me at my blog, curriculumcoffee.com. If you head there, I'm on there too. So connect with
That's
me.
awesome.
I love meeting with educators and just chatting, all that good stuff. So
That's
definitely
awesome.
reach out.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Connect with her. She will inspire you. She will grow you. She will challenge you. She will make you better. Katelynn, thanks again. I appreciate this and I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.